Hello, and this week's video is going to be a crash course in cellular respiration and both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So first, the most important thing for this is to know what ATP is, or to give a little reminder. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and it is a type of energy. And this energy is used for all cells. All cells need this energy. And why might they need it? Well, ATP is what allows cells to grow, to move, to perform synthesis and reparations, etc. So pretty much all the things that a cell does rely on ATP energy. So first, we'll take a look at the steps for ATP production. So this is the structure of an ATP molecule, right? Because it's adenosine triphosphate. So you have your adenosine, which is your base. Then you have your sugar, which is in this case a ribose. And then you have 3-phosphate, triphosphate over here, right? So this might remind you of a nucleotide, and this is a nucleotide, but it has 3 phosphates and a ribose sugar. So it's pretty similar to the structure of DNA. In order to have ATP as energy, ATP releases the energy by releasing a phosphate. So let me show you what I mean. So ATP, which is here, goes and releases a phosphate bond right here. And when this phosphate is released and the bond is broken, energy is released. And this is how we go to ADP, because ADP only has 2 phosphates. And this is how we end up using energy. This is how we use ATP. Then this ADP is recharged back into ATP, so it gains back a phosphate. And it does that via energy from food. So we eat food to gain energy, to give us back that phosphate, to convert back into ATP, so we can continue to perform cellular respiration, which is what our cells end up using. So the phosphate is put back on, and the molecule is recharged via the energy from food. And this is the ATP cycle. So here you can see how we have ATP. It goes and releases a phosphate. This energy that is caused by the release of the phosphate, the breaking of the bond, is used for cellular work, and then it goes back into ATP via the energy from food. So I have created this little diagram which shows the energy process that leads to anaerobic or aerobic respiration. So we all start off with glucose, right? So this is C6H12O6. And then we perform glycolysis. Glycolysis is a process. This is the name of a process. Glycolysis is what converts sugar, or glucose more specifically, into a pyruvate, which is basically when the sugar is split in half. However, it's not going to be, the molecules will not completely be split in half. It's going to be C3H4 and O3. And if you're interested, you can Google, but this video is just really a crash course. So here we end up with pyruvates, and then we go into respiration, and this is when the roads split. So you have aerobic respiration and you have anaerobic respiration. And in aerobic respiration, aerobic, kind of like air, right? This is when oxygen is present. So O2 is present. And this is very important. You cannot have aerobic respiration without oxygen. On the other hand, anaerobic respiration is with no oxygen. And the other difference is that aerobic respiration is performed in the mitochondria, and anaerobic respiration is performed in the cytoplasm of the cell. So aerobic respiration is pretty simple. There's only one type, and it's the respiration that we're most familiar with, I would say. And anaerobic respiration is also called fermentation, so people refer to it as both. And there's 2 types, one in which the byproduct is lactic acid, and the other in which the byproducts are alcohol and CO2. And we'll take a look at this. So first, let's take a look at alcoholic respiration. And this occurs in mostly yeast and bacteria. And what the name might suggest, this process results in byproducts of alcohol and CO2. And this is, for example, how beer is fermented, or how bread rises with yeast or with sourdough bread, how the alcohol is evaporating in the oven and how the carbon dioxide is also released. And when the carbon dioxide is released, this is what causes the bread to rise, actually. So then there's the second type of fermentation, which is lactic acid fermentation. And this also occurs in bacteria, but also in some animal cells. So as the name might suggest, the byproduct of this is lactic acid, and this happens in animals when emergency ATP is needed. So when the cells cannot perform any more aerobic respiration and they just have to get that. So for example, if you're doing strenuous exercise for like a really long time and you feel that kind of burn, you're feeling lactic acid because your cells are now performing lactic acid fermentation actually instead of aerobic respiration. Okay, and last type is aerobic respiration. And we perform this because this is the most effective for us. This makes the most ATP. Bacteria or yeasts opt for these type of respiration. They don't need that much ATP either way. But us and a lot of other animals, we need a lot of ATP, and relying on lactic acid fermentation or alcoholic fermentation is just not sufficient for us. So this is aerobic respiration, which happens in most animal cells. And this is the equation that we're all familiar with, where we have glucose that reacts with oxygen, and then that produces carbon dioxide, water, and releases ATP energy for our use. So these are the three types of respiration, one of which is aerobic, two of which aren't, and this is, as a recap, the crash course about respiration. We have ATP, which we all need for energy, and how it's used is that a phosphate from ATP is released, and then this has to also be recharged by food. When this phosphate is released, energy is released. We use this energy, and we go from glucose, we enter glycolysis, which results in a pyruvate, and then we go into the two different types of respiration. The two anaerobic respirations do not require oxygen and take place in the cytoplasm, and one of which is alcoholic fermentation, and it results in alcohol and carbon dioxide as a byproduct. The other one is lactic fermentation, which results in lactic acid as a byproduct. And lastly, aerobic respiration produces the most ATP, and it's when glucose reacts with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide, water, and ATP that we use. Alright, so I hope you got a little crash course, and I hope you understand way better what respiration is, different types, what they mean, what they entail, and see you next week.